morning. Hello. I hope you all can hear me well. Thank you. Welcome everyone here at the Colburn, and welcome everyone joining us virtually. We are incredibly excited to have you here for our first Women in Architecture in-person event since 2019. Welcome to Powerful 9, Everyday Allies.
And I'm Yuming Wei, the other co-chair. We are both very excited.
I'm Kristen. Sorry, I'm the co-chair.
Sorry. All right. Go ahead.
We're both very excited to finally be here today, bringing everyone together in person and online to celebrate, inspire, and spotlight women in architecture and everyday allyship. Before diving in, today's agenda is always available with this QR code. Feel free to access it now with your phones. I know they said to just put your phones away, but right now is fine.
Okay. Also, our in-person attendees can receive 6 AIA learning units via this second QR code. Did you get the first one yet?
Okay, good with the phones? Okay. We want to start today with our gratitudes. We hope everyone in the audience will come to appreciate the many voices who helped assemble this conference, who curated and contributed their perspective on intentional allyship, both within architecture and beyond.
We also want to extend our thanks to our corporate sponsors who recognize the value of this forum and have provided financial support for Powerful. Thank you to 2022 AIA-LA annual sponsors. For our Powerful 9 event, we thank presenting sponsors KFA Architecture and ZGF.
And thank you to our champion sponsors, HED, Walter P. Moore, Performance Lighting Systems, and Co-Architects.
And thank you to student scholarship sponsors NAC Architecture, Pack-Clad Peterson Aluminum, Hensel Phelps, Clayco Inc., and Tim Barber Architects, whose support provided free student tickets to this event. Welcome students to Powerful 9. In addition, we would like to thank our happy hour sponsor, AC Martin, and ARC Document Solutions for providing today's printed materials.
And also, we would like to thank our Friends of Powerful sponsors and participating sponsors. Here is a video message from our presenting sponsor, KFA.
I remember in my interview the pride in Barbara Fleming's voice when she told me the firm was more than 50% women.
And it's not an intention, but it's just looking at the person and the talent.
We don't feel like we're the exception in the architecture industry. We feel like we belong at the table just as anybody else would.
I walked around and I saw women in leadership roles. I felt like I knew this was where I wanted to be.
There are so many women in the positions of leadership, from partner to senior associates to project directors, and that really shows staff of all levels that you can be anything that you want to be at KFA or in this industry.
I think we need to support each other and be a mentor to other people, to other women in the profession, and share your story.
You can reach out to any woman leadership any day, every day, and ask all the hard questions, the easy questions. That's powerful.
My daughter, who's almost 4, says my job is to build castles.
And then a personal big one for me is their support of motherhood, just ensuring that I have a strong work and home life balance.
We all stand on the shoulders of those who have come before us. And it is important for us to recognize the opportunities that we've been given by other women in architecture. It's their legacy for us to be able to bring that forward.
Conferences like Powerful show us our community. We see how far we have come and how much farther we can go together.
Powerful is an opportunity to stretch for my sisters. Powerful is having confidence not only in my profession, but in myself.
Powerful is an emphasis on collaboration.
What opportunities are there at KFA for women? The sky is the limit.
We are united voices, part of lifting that community up and forward, and being amongst this amazing community. That's powerful.
Thank you, KFA. And finally, we'd like to thank the AIA-LA team, without whom none of this would be possible. And speaking of, we are all very lucky enough to have Mitra Mamari, AIA-LA's 2022 president and partner at ZGF, to help introduce the conference. Please welcome Mitra to the stage.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. It's wonderful to be back in person again together. I'm Mitra Mamari, partner at ZGF, and today I'm going to be wearing two hats. One, as a sponsor, I'm going to share a little bit about ZGF as a partner there, and then as the AIA-LA president, I'll like to welcome you officially. At ZGF, we have about 800, almost 800 employees, and we work in a variety of project types, from healthcare to higher education to life sciences and workplaces. And unlike some other large firms, we don't have studios. We have a handful of team members who are experts in that project type, and the rest of the team gets to work and go from one project to another, which really brings new ideas and new ways of thinking to our project types. We really like that. Sustainability is at the heart of what we do. It's in our DNA, and everything that we touch has that viewpoint as we start designing. I think the last time I checked, we have 64 LEED Platinum buildings in our portfolio. Back in 2013, we started a diversity and inclusion advocacy group. I was one of the founding members to really address all of the issues related to both gender equity and the JEDI initiatives that now have taken prominence. At that time, our goal was to really internally look at ourselves and our processes. Over the years, we've looked externally. We have a great connection with the HBCU universities, with the National NOMA organization, with our local chapters in our different offices, continuing to help and support diversifying our profession. As I said, sustainability is a big component. This is the Spruce Goose Hangar in Playa Vista. It's an adaptive reuse project. We modified it in order for a big tech company to occupy it. This is the California Air Resources Board. This is where all of the emissions get tested. You may recall that Volkswagen problem a few years ago that was found out in this facility, and recently this year we finished their new project. What's great about it? It's a net positive project. And super excited about this. This is just down the street from us here at Exposition Park. It's the new science center for the shuttle Endeavour, that will be in a launch position. It will be standing about 22 feet high. It started construction in June, and we're super excited to get going on it. And then this is a women's and children's hospital we're building in San Antonio. And one of the things that really resonates for me in this, that this was a community hospital that really wanted to become the hospital of choice for everyone. And we really took care about finding the different ways women want to have birthing experiences and providing that for them. What's unique about all of these projects is that they are all women-led, and I'm very proud of that, that we have great leadership at ZGF in our women. So I'm gonna now change my hat to the president. And I wanted to start off by saying, Zan زندگی، آزادی. Woman, life, freedom. Thank you. As an immigrant from Iran whose family fled after the revolution, the actions taking place now resonate strongly with me. The protests throughout Iran and across the globe have taken up the rallying cry with a poignancy and urgency that cannot be ignored. Though we've watched brave efforts to change the status quo for women be quashed before, we still hope that this time it will be different. In Afghanistan, we see the abrupt reversal of hard-won women's rights along with the return of the Taliban. After many years of freedom and normalcy, women and girls have been forced to go backwards. It is not lost on me that I can stand here today as a professional woman to welcome an amazing group of other professional women to a conference entitled Powerful. And yet, at the same time, I'm acutely aware that here in the US, women's rights are also backsliding, with a looming threat of more limitations on our freedom still to come. How can we stay on course at home and also stand up for women in even more oppressed situations? We gather, as we are doing today, and demonstrate our commitment to lifting each other up. Today's event is focused on the architecture and design profession through the special lens of what it means to be a woman within this profession. We come together to learn from each other, to support each other, and with these collective efforts, we become stronger and we become more powerful. You may hear women express the wish that one day we won't need to have a group like Women in Architecture. We are simply architects, period. But I believe that organizations like ours are not changing women or keeping us on the sidelines. They are nourishing us and clarifying our goals. They keep us moving in the right direction. We have a spectacular day ahead of panels and speakers and many opportunities to catch up with colleagues and make new contacts. I'm so honored to welcome all of you to this outstanding day that has been created by women and for women. We are powerful. We are so happy today to have the 2024 AIA National President-elect, Ms. Kimberly Dowdell, to kick off our conference. Ms. Dowdell graduated from Cornell University with a Bachelor of Architecture in 2006. She received a Master of Public Administration from Harvard University in 2015 and was elected to the Cornell University Board of Trustees. She's currently Marketing Principal at HOK Architect. In her terms as the 2019-2020 National President of the National Organization of Minority Architects, NOMA, she worked closely with her board of directors and staff to increase opportunities for women and people of color to gain more equitable access to the building professions. She also more than doubled the organization's membership and significantly raised NOMA's profile during her 2 years in office. Her platform as AIA president will be ensuring there is space for minority architects at every level of AIA. She has outlined her intentions to create access to opportunities, foster greater opportunities for leadership, and build upon the legacy of longtime members. Kimberly's overarching mission to improve people's lives by design. Please welcome Ms. Kimberly Dowdell.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. It's such a delight to be here and to welcome you to this amazing event. Thank you to AIA Los Angeles, the Women in Architecture Committee. Thank you all for being here. I wish I could be joining you in person. This is not quite as much fun, me sitting in my hotel room somewhere in the Midwest, but hopefully I'll get to join you at the next event. But just wanted to start by saying I'm delighted to be here and kind of get into a couple of stats that I think some of you may know already. So I'm the 100th president of the American Institute of Architects, just voted in this year, which I'm super excited about. But also I'm the first Black woman to be in this role, which I think many of you know is something that that's a long time coming. It's been 165 years that the organization has been in existence. And we've only actually had 7 women who've served as president and 3 African-American presidents. So I'm the third Black president, 7th woman. And, I'm excited about what my role represents. Not only just the work of doing what we need to do to make the profession better, but also helping people to envision new possibilities, which is what I talked a bit about during my campaign. Another interesting set of numbers that I just want to talk a little bit about this morning as we discuss everyday allies. Architecture is an amazing profession. It's one of the best things that one can do as a profession. We're a small but mighty group. In fact, there are 121,600 licensed architects in the U.S., according to one of the latest stats. Interesting fact, there are actually more attorneys in your great state of California than there are architects in the entire country. So again, we're small but mighty, but we have the opportunity to shape the way that people live their lives, which is a great privilege and a great responsibility. But of that 121,000, only about 25% of that number of licensed architects are women. So we have some work to do there. However, one of the positive things to note is that about half of the students in architecture school right now are women. Obviously, the other half are men. And so the pipeline is there. We just need to ensure that we're creating strong pathways into the profession and finding ways to keep both men and women in our profession for the long run. And so of that 121,600 members, only about under 2,500 are African-American, and there's a very specific number of Black women, 555. In fact, there's so few of us that we all know our number. So I'm number 295, which is an issue that we need to address as a profession. So that's another reason why I think it's important just to have representation. But I didn't get here alone. I like to say that I stand on the shoulders of giants. So I just want to give a little bit of credit to those who really paved the pathway for me, starting with Susan Maxman, who was the first female AIA president in 1993, and also thinking about just a few years later, Cheryl McAfee, who was the first female president of NOMA, the National Organization of Minority Architects, in 1996. And so those 2 women in particular have paved a pathway for me to serve as president of actually both of these organizations all these years later. But also thinking about Marshall Purnell, who was the first African-American president of AIA in 2008. And also the example set by Bill Bates, who was the second African-American president, who I had the privilege of serving alongside in 2019 when I also happened to be in my first year of my presidency at NOMA. And then my second year at NOMA, I also had the privilege of serving alongside Jane Frederick, who was AIA president in 2020. And I have to give a lot of credit and really gratitude to Jane for the work that we did together to bring NOMA into the alliance organizations to have a seat at the table with some of the other organizations that really lead our profession. So obviously AIA, AIAS, NCARB, NAB, and ACSA. And so thinking about how NOMA now has a seat at the table, in part because of the the everyday ally that Jane served as back then. And then also more recently, she was very instrumental in encouraging me to run for AIA president. So I think about just how important it is to have not just allies, but mentors, and for us to be allies to one another and to mentor one another, and to really look at ways that we can contribute in all manner of ways to support people as they navigate their profession. So I want to thank all the people who I just mentioned for the role that they've played in really getting me to where I am. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a couple of other people, including former NOMA President Steve Lewis, who's a Los Angeles resident and someone who I think many of you know in the room. And then also Kathy Dixon. So those two folks were very instrumental early in my career, and even to this day, they'll pick up the phone anytime I call to ask for advice. So really appreciative of the role that they've played. And then more recently, I've gotten to know Emily Grandstaff Rice, who I'll be serving as AIA president after. So she'll get started in December as AIA president for 2023, and then I'll be following her. And she's been an amazing ally to me through the years. We got to know each other through serving on the Equity and the Future of Architecture Committee together a number of years ago. And so, just building connections with people in the profession are so important. And so I just named a few names of so many different people. I'm sure I've missed some really key names, but those are folks that, that I've worked with most recently, or that have set a new standard for being the first of something. And so excited to be the first in this role that I mentioned. I'm also the first millennial as serving as AIA president. So that's a fun fact. But really thinking about our young people, millennials, and now Gen Z, how we really are interested in making this profession, greater and more of our own in a slightly different way than I think Gen Xers and baby boomers have done it. But also I think there's a lot of commonality. So part of what I'd like to do in 2024 and leading up to that is help to build bridges between the various generations, which is exciting and important work. The other thing I just wanted to share, and I'll kind of talk through one slide that I'll show in a moment, is just what my platform is for my presidency in 2024. And some of you maybe heard my campaign materials. This is not new, but the good news is I'm remaining consistent with what I said on the campaign trail. But before I get into that, I just wanted to actually take a moment to acknowledge that a lot of what I've accomplished in my career is relative to my volunteer service with both NOMA and AIA, which are important. And I've gained so many great friends and connections and mentors and allies through that work. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that I couldn't do this work without the support of HOK, my firm, that actually initially joined in 2008 as a very young architect or emerging architect at that point in the New York office. So I worked for the firm for 3 years, and they were very supportive of my, at that point, board leadership for NOMA. But I actually left for 8 years and came back in 2019 in Chicago. But I left for 8 years to do a number of different things and gain so many different experiences and mentors and allies in different fields and areas of study. So I'll just give a quick overview of that and get back to what I'm thinking about for AIA. But I left HOK to be an owner's rep or project manager in New York, which was a great experience to get to understand the other side of the table, if you will. Then I went off to graduate school to study public administration. And sometimes people ask me, as an architect, why would you want to study public administration? My simple answer to that is buildings are very much a part of the public realm. And I've gained so many amazing connections to policymakers and others who really shape the policies that shape the way that we do our work. And so that's been a great experience and network that I tap into even to this day. Then I actually went back home to my hometown, Detroit, Michigan, and worked in city government for a period of time. And then I also did some real estate entrepreneurship work, and I taught architecture and urban planning at the University of Michigan. So I've had quite a sampling, a sampling of different things in our profession and somewhat outside of it. But I came back to the profession in 2019 to serve as a principal at HOK in Chicago, and the firm has been super supportive of both my NOMA presidency and then now stepping into this role of AIA. So thank you to my mentors and supporters and allies, frankly, at EHOK for their support. And so wherever you are in your profession, it is critical that you build those strong relationships throughout, and don't forget about the people that you started your career with, because you very well may come back to them, which is the case with me and the folks at my firm. So that's just a lesson learned there that I'd like to impart. So I'm going to share my screen for a moment, talk about what my thoughts are for 2024, and then let you get back to what I assume will be an amazing time together in person. Again, I'm really sorry that I could not physically be there, but again, looking forward to joining you in the future. So share my screen for a moment, talk a few more minutes, and then let you get back to it. So I hope that you can see my screen here. Although I can't hear anyone, so I'm assuming that's a yes. So I'm showing the what I like to call my alphabet platform, which is A, advocating for architects in practice, B, belonging in the profession, C, climate action, and D, designing for the future. So I'll spend just a few moments talking about what those represent and why I'm excited about 2024 and the time leading up to it, and then certainly what happens afterward. So architects in practice, really simply just making sure that architecture is a profession that people see themselves in, no matter what they look like, where they are in the country, whether they work for a small firm, a mid-sized firm, a large firm, or even an alternative path. I think looking at architects in practice is especially important because we want to ensure that we can build pathways into our profession. I think most of us are feeling the stress of not having enough talent, and so we need to attract more talent and we need to retain more talent. And I think part of that is advocating for greater compensation, not just for employees from their employers, but as architects, requesting and requiring higher valuation of our work from our clients, and finding ways to help us articulate the value that we create so that we can actually earn the money that we that we truly deserve, so that we can pay our staff accordingly and compete with some of the other professions that are frankly taking some of our talent away. So that's one of a few different ways that we can start to do a better job advocating for architects in practice. Belonging in the profession is it basically represents the diversity, equity, inclusion work that so many of you I know are very involved with, and obviously the work with NOMA is a part of that. But really pushing the AIA to provide more resources, including the guides for equitable practice, which have been out for a while, but ensuring that people know about them and that they use them as a resource. And so just thinking about ways that we can ensure that everyone who wants to become an architect, who's qualified to do the work, has a place in our profession, no matter what they look like, who they love, where they live, what their background is. Belonging in the profession is really a high priority. Climate action, I mean, literally, if we don't figure this out, we're not gonna have a planet to live on. So we've really got to coordinate our efforts and do a much better job with our stewardship of the earth. And there are lots of different ways that architects can do that, as you know. And then D, designing for the future. That one doesn't describe exactly the intent behind it, but designing specifically the future relative to technology and how technology is rapidly changing our profession and the way that we practice. And so getting ahead of that and better understanding how we can best leverage technology to really give ourselves an advantage and sort of catch up on some of the things that perhaps we're behind on relative to just again, value creation and receiving the value that we create. And then also engaging our younger professionals in more meaningful ways, again, with technology in mind. So that's a really high level overview of some of the things that, that we're talking about at AIA, certainly over the next year, where continuing the strategic priorities that have been set for some time now. And so those two priorities are climate action and racial and gender equity. So that's kind of what I have to share. I just want to make sure that you know that I'm excited about the work that you all are doing, and your various stages in the career, and various firm sizes and locations throughout presumably California. There probably are some other people calling in from other locations, but wherever you are and whatever you're doing, thank you for your work, and continue to seek out allies and be an ally. I think that's the big theme for this event, and just continue to be powerful. That's the message, and thank you again for having me, and have a great day. Take care.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. Your mission aligns with WIA's and the theme of this conference. We look forward to working alongside you to create greater access, more equal and inclusive opportunities within our community, and a broader legacy for the profession.
When Kristen and I first met in January to discuss this conference, we had no clue where to begin. Thankfully, we zeroed in pretty quickly on the simple idea that there's a lot to celebrate in the everyday. The deliberate work, small actions, and quiet fortitude that lead to gradual and effective progress. Our theme of Everyday Allies connects discussions throughout our event and highlights a wide range of passions and work that inspire. We are also inspired by our committed WIA members who put their own spins on our theme of allyship in curating each of the afternoon workshops.
For this morning, we have assembled a broad range of powerful individuals who showcase everyday allyship. First is our keynote, Marian Weiss of Weiss Manfredi, who will present her distinctive work and design process. Juliana Serrano of Planned Parenthood of Pasadena and San Gabriel Valley will speak to our group about her advocacy for reproductive autonomy and space. We will then hear from two sets of panelists. First, we are lucky to feature emerging practice leaders Una Ryan and Mary Casper. And second, we are excited to have Jennifer Sakeda and Danielle Teez join us on the Architectural Workers panel. And right before we break for lunch, Barbara Boza from Disney Imagineering will conclude our morning session.
For our afternoon workshops, our WIA collaborators have developed 7 unique programs. Attendees can explore different aspects of our profession through selected topics such as Leadership Starts Now, Entrepreneurship for Sole Business Owners, Stepping into Leadership of a Legacy Firm, Intersectionality, Gender, and Identity, Architecture, Her Story, Women in STEAM, and Women Build Together at the OAC Table. I hope you've been able to sign up for those that interest you the most.
Thank you so much for your collective energy in gathering here this morning. I know personally it was not easy to get here in an early hour, but what helped me move quickly was the spirit and passion I've seen from all the volunteers, collaborators, and guest speakers. We hope this spirit is as transparent to you as it is to us, and that the theme of allyship will resonate with you well beyond today's events.
Hello, good morning. My name is Ashley Richardson, Managing Principal with Ehrlich, Yanai, Reed Cheney Architects, and I am the past co-chair of Women in Architecture. On behalf of the presenting sponsor, Steinberg Hart, I am honored to present our featured speaker, Marian Weiss, who is joining us via Zoom. Marian Weiss is the co-founder of Weiss Manfredi and the Graham Chair Professor of Practice at the University of Pennsylvania's Weitzman School of Design. Her New York City-based multidisciplinary practice is known for the dynamic integration of architecture, art, infrastructure, and landscape. She was honored by Architectural Record with the Women in Architecture Design Leader Award, and her firm has also been recognized with the Cooper Hewitt National Design Award for Architecture, the 2020 Thomas Jefferson Foundation Medal in Architecture, and the New York Center for Architecture President's Award. Marian Weiss has also taught at Harvard, Cornell, and Yale University, where she was the Saarinen Visiting Professor of Architecture. She received her Bachelor of Science in Architecture from the University of Virginia and her Master of Architecture at Yale University, where she won the American Institute of Architects Scholastic Award and the Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill Traveling Fellowship of the AIA and is an inductee of the National Academy of Design. Please welcome Marion Weiss.
Well, thank you so much for including me in this incredible gathering that you all have on the West Coast. I wish I could be with you, but I'm happy to be with you virtually. What is about the gathering that you have right now is that the whole idea of power is something that has really been changing terms, and certainly a question of where power is and why it's important and what we do with it. And so what I wanted to do was to actually share a collection of projects that we've done and do it in the context of what power has meant for us, which is really the question of the kind of breathing room it takes to be able to gather strength, to gather power, if you will, and actually think about what that means in the context of your question about allies. So I'm going to share the screen and contextualize some of the things that have been preoccupations for my firm, Weiss Manfredi Architecture, Landscape, and Urbanism. Let's just share with you right here that we're calling this, or I'm calling this question here, breathing room, something that touches on the question of advocates, allies, and anomalies. And as I think about our sort of role here in the world in some ways seen from afar is a very tiny space. And what's so clear right now is that the idea of property lines really means nothing when we think about climate change, when we think about social agendas, when we think about the forces that come into question about what power can mean. And preoccupation, I think for all of us, particularly with the pandemic, has been the question of what breathing means. And the room that we all share and the breath we all share it makes us think about definitions. And in this case, a definition from Oxford Dictionary says breathing room, also breathing space, talks about sufficient room to move and breathe comfortably. And then if I think about Cambridge Dictionary, they say breathing room, also breathing space. And the word space really touches on what we do in broader terms, which is a period of rest in order to increase strength, to give you more time to think about what to do next. And arguably the pandemic, I think, has given all of us the time to question what we do next. And then on anomalies really are the question of when the absence of breathing room is at stake, perhaps innovation is what gets catalyzed from that moment. So to put in context some things that we've been thinking about a lot, Michael Manfredi and I both share our practice, Weiss Manfredi Architecture, Landscape, Urbanism, which is about thinking about all these connected terrains. And if we think about the most connected terrains, pandemics certainly led to social, political, and economic shifts. And they have also transformed the design of our cities and buildings, all of them linked. And when we think about that, public health was really a spatial practice. Thinking about the quarantine, the term coming from the 14th century, the whole idea of actually being held, in this case, 40 giorni, 40 days before landing, ships arriving from Venice. That was kind of an institutionalized idea of space and time coming together for protection and safety. And we think about the pandemics prompted by urban sanitary reforms. And again, the Industrial Revolution and contagious diseases forced us to rebuild infrastructures. In the case of London, the cholera outbreak, it led to this whole idea of an underground sewage system. So the spatializing of health and connectivity is one thing. But then we think about light and air becoming the law. And in New York City, the kind of rezoning at the turn of the century over 100 years ago to make sure that light and air and density could be, in a sense, coalesced around the growth of a city. And then the whole idea that we all need room to breathe. And as diseases were shaping modern architecture, Alto's Hymo Sanatorium was a very good example of privileging the whole idea of outdoor space, even if it was in fact elevated. So again, this whole idea of masterpieces, and Laurie Olin's piece that was just in the Wall Street Journal yesterday really spoke about the art form that Central Park truly is. And it was really identified as a place of public health, the lungs of the city. And as we think about that lungs of the city idea, this question of breathing room really takes stake not only in just the immediate sense of an individual needing breathing room, but a whole city and a community benefiting from structured breathing room. So what becomes interesting here is this whole idea of anomalies in all of this. And it's the anomalies that seem to somehow catalyze advocates. And I'm going to share 6 or 7 projects today just in terms of this question about anomalies, advocates, and allies. And in this case, the absence of a site for recognition catalyzed innovation for the Women's Memorial Education Center, which was our first project that we did. Michael and I won it as a competition. And the interesting question was, in a forgotten site, there was a forgotten subject of over 2 million women who served as patriots in the country, but had no recognition, not to mention no benefits compared to the men who had served. And we had a client, General Vaught, who found this site that was a gateway to Arlington Cemetery that had really been designed just as a retaining wall. It had no meaning. And she had said, can we acknowledge and celebrate the women who'd served since the Revolutionary War and create a place for them? We promised to fix this wall up. It's kind of a mess. And if you met General Vaught ever, you realize if anybody ever came up to you and said something's a mess and need to be rectified, she was the one that would make it happen. And so Congress, within 4 months, actually gave her this site to host as a place for competition. And we used it as a site to say, when we won the competition, that wall had been a barrier, simply a retaining wall. Women had faced barriers, and we could actually come through the barriers, that we could actually enable her advocacy for the women who had no voice and no legibility, create a place or a commemorative gallery, a place of ascent to bring you to Arlington Cemetery, and now an arc of glass tablets that could be inscribed with the words of and about the women who served, and have that expression, if you will, be read and legible underground only through sunlight. And so again, the inscriptions in the glass could be read in shadows in the gallery. And then ultimately those very private words could be seen not only across the cemetery, but be seen in collaboration with the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument as part of the constellations of places of recognition and honor. And so there was a case where advocacy in an absent site with absent recognition was what was necessary to enable something to happen that wouldn't have happened before. That's a form of power that is remarkable. But another form of power for us is really the power of architecture submitting to the whole idea of landscape, and with that reciprocity, enabling new forms of breathing room. So at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden Visitor Center, we had a chance, if you will, to be an advocate for something that had not been advocated for, which was for a visitor center to be part of an itinerary. And as it's part of itinerary of the city, that it could also be a place where the separation between the edge of the city and the beauty of the garden could be seen not as either or, but maybe a continuum. Now, this had been the gateway or the entry to the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, and on Mother's Day alone, they typically get a little bit over 40,000 people coming through this gate, this little turnstile. Now, off in the distance on the far right of the screen was where they wanted to put the visitor center, so you come from the parking lot and come straight into the garden. And our feeling was that, in fact, that would be a mistake, that we should come from the edge of the city and into the garden, so that we didn't impose ourselves on the garden. And so we, in the course of our interview, changed the site and maybe changed the terms of what something that could be 100% urban and 100% natural might look like. And as we look at this particular image, you can start to see people now coming through the urban corner to enter the garden and pass through, if you will, now a new trellis, a new form of a glass trellis, that enables you to make a turn to the left to the city or to the right into the garden. but see that kind of continuum as something that is 100% natural. And just as Olmsted had an imprint on the city with Central Park, certainly had an imprint on the development of the paths here at the 52-acre Brooklyn Botanic Garden. And in this case, we wanted to honor those paths to keep clear of the drip line of this cherry tree and enable that kind of continuum of pathways to also enable us to actually have an enhanced width path here to be a room that could actually seat about 250, a two-sided room, in fact. And where we had to remove some ginkgo trees, those ginkgo trees were then replaned and recast to form the walls of this room. But you can start to see that the building really is an inhabitable topography, and up on the upper left, you can start to see people actually part of that slalom route on the upper level, so one could actually pass over and through the building without actually entering. Again, this kind of hybridity, though, of being 100% natural at a certain point became something very interesting for us. And if you can see here in this particular view, there are moments where the building disappears and it really becomes really a place where the topography has breathing room and opens up. Again, the whole idea of simultaneity of architecture and landscape being in service of something larger becomes important when we actually think about what it would be if we extended this, what had been a 400-foot linear entry into the garden, into something that might extend further to accommodate accessibility. So if you look at this idea of a chameleon of collaboration, at the bottom you can see the building 100% urban, and at the very top you can see something that's 100% landscape. And so we were unable to, in the very first phase of the project, to accommodate the true arrival from the subway, which has over a 25-foot grade change. And we helped the garden get a grant to be able to do something a little bit better than the image on the left to accommodate an accessible route that would also take care of an existing unstable slope within the garden. And so by thinking about architecture and landscape together, we were able to identify a slalom, if you will, about 1,000-foot walkway that with over 600 individual precast panels could actually form the basis or structure for a brand new garden that would, if you see on the upper left where the subway arrival is, make its way down and slalom into the garden. And within each turn of that slalom, there would be views of either Cherry Esplanade, the Rose Garden, but stabilizing now something that would be an adventure as opposed to simply an accessible route, and an adventure into a kind of a new ecology, a new garden, if you will, a new sort of lush garden that over time may very well overtake these walls so that you truly feel as if you are simply slaloming through a new garden. But more importantly, it's not just those who are in a wheelchair, but those who are with strollers and families, that this is really a route that is not so much of an accommodation, but hopefully a celebration of the garden. And this animation, hopefully showing up at your end, gives you a sense of then the connectivity between the inhabitable topography of the visitor center, but also this sculpted topography of the Robert Wilson Overlook. So we now move to this question of advocates and allies. Breathing room, you could argue, says that a loose fit has value. And our feeling, though, is that loose fit is not undermining the possibility of proximity, because proximity and peripheral vision together can actually catalyze things that might not be catalyzed without that proximity. So in the competition that we won for the Kent State Center for Architecture and Environmental Design, in this case, what we were interested in doing was thinking about, in a sense, the neutrality here in Kent, Ohio, where factories were common, many of them abandoned. But this whole idea of a common loft that can be shared and light-filled as a place of collaboration became a model that inspired us to think about how this College of Architecture and Environmental Design, which has architecture, urban design and interiors and a number of other disciplines, how could we create a new topographic set of connections that would enable the studio spaces, classrooms, gallery, lounge, cafe, et cetera, to be seen as an ensemble, if you will, a new kind of factory that could be one that would take full advantage of the elevation of the campus, which is very low. You can see on the left, and the elevation of the city, which is higher, nearly 6 stories on the right. So the building is something that actually stretches, and you see off in the distance, stretches to this new and emerging downtown campus or landscape, and creates a new Tiffany window for architecture in particular to the core of the campus. Now that kind of itinerary, if you see this here on the ground level, you can see that there's a kind of a social stair that brings you upstairs and actually protects the cafe, and off in the distance you can see an event space and library. But it's the whole idea of being able to have that sense of proximity and vista and light shared, so that when one comes into a studio, and here you could say this is the very first day of studio before the proper degree takes place. Up in the distance on the left, you can see that there's in fact review spaces that are acoustically independent but visually connected. So that whole idea of proximity and engagement is one where in this particular view, you can see people in the studio, but also people in the review space. And that sense that the place of creation, the place of presentation are not very far from one another. But for us, this question of what does it mean to be within the kind of periphery of other settings also means having respect for those settings. And so this is the intimate side, campus side, if you will, where the materiality of brick is common and the scale was almost residential. And so we actually were very excited to work with Belden Brick, who had contributed very much to the materials library at the university for the building, to come up with a new custom brick that would leverage the fact that a nearly abandoned kiln here, the Beehive kiln, that could never promise you regular color, could actually produce one more thing, and in this case now, an extruded brick that would take that iron spot and take it out just to the edges of capacity before it needed to be reinforced by steel, to add a new tactile engagement with that building facade as it descended and reached the ground at the campus side. But, you know, together, it's this idea that something is both tactile but also impactful in its expression that comes into focus here. And you can start to see those studio spaces are always the kind of vitrine of activity, because it's probably the only program that does exist on a kind of 24-hour array. But then this question of advocates and allies becomes really interesting here. Again, another university project where creating breathing room for innovative thinking became super important for Joe Tsai, who had been a graduate at Yale and was very aware that as we think about the engineering area, where engineering is at stake at Yale University, it's formidable, and much of it, you can see the Marcel Boyer-Becton building on the left, formidable in its brutalist expression.
Recording in progress.
But also, if you see on the right, the kind of collegiate Gothic at Yale and some of the less than compelling buildings done in the 60s and 70s beyond. But completely hidden back here within all these engineering buildings was the idea of any kind of collaborative space that would break outside the laboratory. And so the query was, how on earth could you create legibility for an aspiration in a very small structure for collaboration and an invitation for collaboration to take place? So we did this kind of, you know, idea of a Magritte view, where at night maybe it comes alive. And this leftover space that truly was really just the backside of all these lab buildings, and in fact, the roof deck of one of the lab levels, could be transformed into a new garden, and a new garden with a tempiero of sorts of transparency or collaboration. And so the aerial view here shows this idea that something about creating a new landscape in a place that had been paved and lost in a backside could in fact create a network for all the engineering buildings to come together. Now, this is an image of me standing in front of a barrier between the kind of collegiate Gothic courtyard that's just in the foreground and the roofscape, if you will, that we're turning into a groundscape. And by tearing that down, we were able to create a new landscape that would connect these invented courtyard above and the existing one below, and then say that the whole idea of innovative thinking and collaborative space could be fully transparent to all the engineering buildings surrounding it. We were really lucky to work with a fantastic fabricator in China that could actually produce 22-foot tall spans by nature of the curvature, which strengthened the glass so that we could literally amplify that transparency. And yet inside, the kind of reconfigurability here of all the furniture to be able to have workshops, et cetera, could also then be something that could be either protected for the sun or made private if there was in fact a kind of convening going on here. This opened just during the pandemic, so this is our staff rather than anybody using the building. But you can also start to see the kind of connective elements, again, visually connected but acoustically independent of the breakout spaces and workrooms above. And here you can start to see, again, the invention. We actually just recycled the paved material that you saw in the original existing photo, but got rid of the pavers that we didn't like, which were bright red. But added a new garden here to be able to handle water collection, but also create a legible identity. Yet one of the things that in the area where you could say we had the least breathing room between the Marcel Breuer building and the Collegiate Gothic, we love the fact that these reflections almost in their craziness could make the Marcel Breuer building look almost as romantic as the Collegiate Gothic in the distance. And yet the whole idea here was that the advocacy of Joe Tsai and Yale for this whole idea of creating a pavilion where innovative thinking and shared projects across the disciplines would come together, acquired a legibility and a stature within an area that had been hidden before. And so this kind of preoccupation that our firm has had, and Michael Manfredi and our team here and students that I teach at Penn all share, is the question that if we diminish the barriers between infrastructure, architecture, and landscape, maybe art in the public realm can actually have a new meaning. So calling this Advocates, Allies, and Anomalies. At the Olympic Sculpture Park in Seattle, what had been super interesting when the Olympic Sculpture Park held this competition was that they were looking at not one site to celebrate and make art free and sculpture free and open to the public, but to heal a site that had been wounded, 40-foot grade change, a highway, train crossing, a failing seawall, fully contaminated. You know, it had everything that we love about a site in that it was centrally located, urgently important to recast as a public destination. And so the design here, which is really, if you will, an earthwork, was one that had to simultaneously address 1,000 contradictory forces, if you will, from environmental to urban to infrastructure to art. And our query was, if we can think about these all together, we can begin to start to imagine now, in this case, a 200,000 cubic yard earthwork that could create multiple environments and a journey that could be slowed down to go from the wander from the city to the water's edge. Now, it meant that we were able to work with some incredible engineers, MKA in Seattle, who introduced us to highway building because it was the most cost effective. And you can see, even with these overlapping concrete planes to hide the mechanically stabilized earth walls, that we could be seismically resilient by that overlapping. And in fact, what was fantastic about all the donors was that as the name Olympic Sculpture Park came into focus, it was never named for one individual, but for a larger horizon. And the idea, though, that everybody could come together and discover the park, discover art, and discover a community that now had a place to wander from the city to the water's edge was something that in our original thinking was that topography could become our friend here. In this case, a valley could forge a new location here for Richard Serra's work, Wake. But it could also be something altogether different, and an amphitheater for a jazz concert could also be formed as it leans towards now the pavilion, really a Kunsthal for art here with Pedro Rey's incredible mural and cupolas suspended. And also Roxy Payne's stainless tree. You can see that the building itself is just conceived as an unfolding topography in and of itself, almost a reification in small form of what really is at stake with this unfolding landform of a landscape. And again, as we think about infrastructure, the whole idea of the highway crossing could be brought into clear focus so that the dead center of the highway, one could actually really see that point amplified on the pedestrian crossing above. But certainly anybody coming through the highway would be mindful that there is something other than a typical crossing above with the point extracted below. And the whole idea of new natures there with Mark Dion's piece on the lower left, a fallen log in the forest brought to the city edge. And we actually designed this enclosure so that this nurse log could actually have a home. And then as we look at this incredible view by Iwan Baan of the simultaneity of the infrastructure of the city and this kind of earthwork crossing, it's a whole idea of infinite worlds being compressed, even crossing here at train tracks. Teresita Fernandez's beautiful work, Seattle Cloud Cover, here on this bridge, but also a place where train spotters who may have no interest in art could actually watch the trains that are heading through and heading up to Canada. Again, though, this question of art coming together and being, in this case now, the walls being the recipients of light and chroma, and the aspen trees beyond, that again, we can start to see that even the rebuilding of the water's edge, which was a very tight site, became a place where it currently even is welcoming new pieces. And here you can see Jaume Planza's work being installed at the base. But for us, one of our proudest moments here was just being an advocate with the museum for a larger environmental quest. And in this case, we pulled back the seawall to create a new beach. There's nothing natural about this, but what is fully natural is all the logs that have made their way in here. But it's really in service of salmon habitat. And you can start to see here that this has been working with the University of Washington, and it continues to be supporting the seawall, which would have been failing, but also creating a new community for salmon habitat. And as it continues to be monitored, it has restored the ecosystem at the water's edge and has now been the new model for rest of the waterfront development that field operations is doing to stabilize the seawall and create habitat. And yet the question is, well, where does power reside? It's never singular in these large complex projects. And as you can start to see here, 1,000 hiccups, checkpoints, advocates, and if you will, antagonists embedded within the process come together to enable the realization of something as transformative as taking a seawall here in a parking lot and turning into something that can actually join the constellation of public destinations in Seattle. And we love this view here because we know there are landmarks such as the Needle off in the distance that people can understand and see, and others that, as we look at the continuum of the water's edge, which have been absent from public realm, which are now becoming increasingly central. And so again, if we think about these anomalies, advocates, and allies, these improbable simultaneous, science needs room to breathe too. And we're really lucky to be in your beautiful city developing the evolution now of La Brea tar pits. And in this case, what's so remarkable about the La Brea tar pits is that it is truly a site that's in formation and that has really defined so much of Los Angeles as we know it. Pleistocene being in full form thousands of years ago. And yet it's been the defining nature of what Los Angeles is really a city that's been in a hurry to redefine its future. And yet it has this incredible past that you could say maybe in the spectacle here of this urban fiction here in the lake pit off of Wilshire Boulevard with the Page Museum beyond, that in a sense, touching the surface of something is one thing, but it's another to truly excavate through science and unearth these amazing mammoths, mastodons, and dire wolves and saber-toothed cats. And yet what's amazing about the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles is that everything in that museum has come from this site, but so much of it is now hidden in storage as it gets prepared and used by the scientists. So the query is, if we think that science and art need room to breathe, what happens when they are hidden by a berm here? And we've got over 360 days a year of active excavation, but also nearly the same for the public coming to discover something here. So we started to think about what might be interesting is to think about the history of La Brea tar pits and the history of Los Angeles as something interwoven. And it was truly that interweaving as we also think about it as a public park. You can see the museum, the LACMA Museum, and even further beyond the Academy Museum, that there's such a constellation of things happening simultaneously. We said, could we look at the latent opportunities of where excavation and research are actively taking place in one part of the park? A central area where community and culture come together with kids rolling down the hill on the berm, but also coming into the Page Museum. And also, if we think of this as a kind of spectacle and urban fiction with the mammoths and mastodons, if you will, at the Lake Pit, and all the movies that have seen this very same image, what if we could think about these things all together? And all together as continuums rather than separate. And so that led to the whole idea of a 1 kilometer loop that allow you to enable you to come in anywhere, but actually discover through these accessible paths the Pleistocene, the Anthropocene, and the Holocene as a continuum, as opposed to something that's divided. And so you can see here, our competition vision really was trying to make sense of something that in some ways seemed contradictory, but seeing them as continuums that would welcome people with shade, and we know shade equity is a huge issue, in particular in Los Angeles, with this kind of the tapestry of all the debris that actually tricked animals to fall into the tar, being reintroduced here as a canopy, but also taking things that have been just simply barriers, perimeter fence, and rethinking them as portals, almost like a construction fence, as places of discovery. And science and museum and excavation and community, that all of these could be seen together as not antithetical. And here the case of research and observers sharing the same canopy. And even the expansion of the existing museum, enabling the existing museum to thrive, while the expansion could also then add new opportunities for exhibition, research, and laboratories. What we thought was so amazing is if you look at this early image here of 100 years ago of all the discoveries coming from this site, to think about those now being somehow accessible to view, and the intensity and immensity of them being something that could be part of an experience in coming to the museum. And the Page Museum was actually one of the first ones to say, let's make the science visible. These are visible labs. The Page Museum pioneered this. A lot of other museums later in line copied this idea. And yet that idea of simultaneously being able to see all of this together is something that we can see right here now through the lens of the carved through this kind of berm. And it's that simultaneity of the magic of Los Angeles that maybe at night you could sit on a blanket out on the new Central Green and see a film that actually tells you a story of the Pleistocene that has no longer there, but still with us because of the pure preservation that the tar had provided for all these specimens. Now, finally, this last project, Anomalies, Advocates, and Allies, relate to contamination, flooding, and a public realm with a commitment for more room to breathe. Hunters Point South Waterfront Park, in many ways a leftover abandoned industrial site, had fantastic views, if you will, back to Manhattan, but also belied a legacy that was at one time wetlands, later on industry. And with Hurricane Sandy, nearly underwater. So the question was, could we design a park that could somehow make sense of this strange edge so that it could create value in advance of developers doing the largest affordable housing development in New York City since the 70s. And so we said that waterfront could actually do many things, but most importantly, it needed to be able to absorb the floodwaters and thrive as opposed to be destroyed during any kind of event. So you can start to see here the park as it unfolds here, opening its way for an urban plan, in this case working with Arup and Xavier Bosley, simultaneously weaving together a larger landscape of infrastructure and public use. Yet here's the thing that's so amazing is that when you're on the water's edge, the ability to co-opt an expanded view, in this case of Manhattan, became something where we could take into focus the activity, being across from the schoolyard and creating a playing field, but we could also create a new prospect of shade and shelter because in fact, here is where the ferry needed a shade and shelter. and in this case also create energy from the solar panels on it, and also collect water to irrigate the park. So again, many, many structures being coalesced here, including concession and the maintenance building and restrooms, but mostly framing now a collection of environments, in this case, Water Taxi Beach now being made a little family friendly, or the kind of sheltering area for concession with views city beyond. And then enabling something as extraordinary as this particular view of Manhattan to be brought into focus and brought into shelter at night. Now, the interesting thing was this project had to happen 5 years apart, phase 1 and phase 2, just because funding streams were variable. Keeping our courage there and realizing that we had to interview once again for a project that we'd already designed all of was certainly breathtaking. But we were very excited about this false topography created through the excavation of the Midtown Tunnel, becoming an opportunity now to carve this topography to create a new stable habitat for wetlands. So you can see this kind of fortified walkway there to protect the wetlands, and that new wetlands being now a resource for habitat that could actually take the tidal flow, which is 6 feet twice a day, fully elevated and then down. In the distance, though, what you can start to see is that this sense of being able to walk on water on that fortification, particularly at high tide, is pretty unusual. In fact, most of the time we're at a really arm's length from the water's edge. And elements that were just peninsulas could now become islands as we excavated behind them to make a place of retreat that would be independent from the rest of the park, but still sort of, again, a kind of unique place to enjoy the prospect of the river and the city. But for us, what became most interesting in this question of breathing room really gets to the horizon beyond. And we were very interested in celebrating the topographic distance between the water's edge and the kind of promenade above, to take the idea of shipbuilding a little bit further, so that the whole idea of the prow of the ship could be shared off these loops of movement. Literally working with shipbuilders in Maine to create something that might actually be brought down to the level of the park and offer incredible views of that horizon beyond. And you can see it at high tide, where you really do feel like the grand prospect and then the intimate views are simultaneous. And if we start to think about this question of breathing room, for us it seems profoundly important, particularly at this time of social challenges and climate challenges and environmental challenges, to really build in such a way that we can welcome larger communities and actually work with the constraints of infrastructure and the obligations of nature to create destinations that can be enduring, have meaning for a larger community than we even know could enjoy it now. So I will close with that thought, which is that I'm really delighted again to be able to be part of the conversation that you were having over the course of the day, and to be part of the conversation that might continue now.
Thank you, Marian. I hope you can hear us okay. Can you hear us?
Barely. I'll listen
We'll
with care.
talk louder. So
Okay.
we've set aside a few minutes for questions from your audience here in LA. We hope you can hear us. Okay. Yes. Well, let me introduce, joining me here on stage is my co-moderator, Kristen Fromini, Vice President HKS and incoming 2023 WIA Chair. So, so we're going to try to start with a couple of questions from us here at the podium and see if we can get some questions from the audience. I think that we want to get confirmation that Marian can hear us before we get started.
I can hear you just barely, so if you all can speak up, though.
All right, I'm
following
sorry.
what you're
Maybe
saying.
we'll speak more into the mic. We'll just talk loud But for those that want to ask questions, you can come down to the mic over here and line up so we can get you guys queued up for the questions. But maybe Kristen, if you want to get us started, and maybe
Yes.
yeah.
Thank you, Yuming. Marion, I'd like to start with a question about your approach to design. You mentioned this concept of breathing room, which is very evocative and descriptive of how your work sort of bridges the gap between natural and urban-built environments. That's a very powerful analogy to think about a space, an urban space, and an ecology that's allowed to breathe, and then in turn allows its occupants to take breath or find a moment of pause in that same space. And I'm wondering, can this also be descriptive of your approach to design, to allow oneself and your collaborators enough room or space to leave detours or invite surprise innovation or even happy accidents? Is this something you can elaborate on, sort of how this process manifests in your work?
It's a great question, and it very much does manifest in our work. I think one of the first things that we like to do in any project is to, in a sense, open questions to ourselves, to our collaborators, in a sense to our clients, to, in a sense, engage in many histories that may be hidden and unseen, and figure out the stakeholders that may be unidentified, so that there's a larger map, if you will, of constellation of possibilities to think about. So we like to delay form making for as long as we can, because then ultimately the forms that emerge are informed by kind of collective intuition that has really benefited from many voices and many delays. Arguably, one of the things that we've had so much fun with clients is that when we have really messy models in the room as opposed to highly polished ones, if something emerges in the course of a conversation where we can actually tear something apart and reassemble it because something makes more sense, the sense of being part of that kind of process with either our clients, our teams, our collaborators, the kind of playfulness of possibility is stained in many ways by sharing tools that we can look at together.
When we spoke at our initial meeting, you talked about some of your projects being defined by endurance, the idea of the long marathon of the project. Can you kind of elaborate on that theme for our audience here?
I think I heard most of that, and it has to do with kind of sustaining, I would say, the kind of courage during these very, very long kind of processes, and to kind of keep the momentum and ambition high. One of the biggest challenges of any public project is that what often seems like it's a straightforward path is not. And public projects can range anywhere from 6 years to 12 years or more. And so along the way, one needs to actually champion new leaders that find their way into the process. We've often had more than one client in the course of a project pick up the momentum and carry it forward. And so that question of how do we collectively as a team keep our courage high as opposed to finding ourselves sanded into submission to things that are less than what it might be, means that one needs to continually refresh the terms and conditions of what success looks like so that everybody can, in a sense, share and collaborate in that vision to kind of keep the kind of momentum and ambition as pure as it can be sustained.
But how do you remain focused on the vision, though? How do you sustain that so that it remains true to your initial ideas and visions? How do you remain focused on the vision, the original vision, when you go through that whole process and the long haul?
You know, that's a really good question because there's moments in the middle of it where, you know, it's very daunting and one wonders with 1,000 roadblocks what to do. And often it is about asking the questions again, and sometimes asking the question about maybe not so much what you're hearing as a solution that you need to take on because some, in a sense, needs to meet a budget or needs to do something because of a new constraint that has emerged, but asking what the general terms and expectations are behind the question as opposed to accepting arguably a solution that we've been told to do. So I think it's about pulling back and recasting questions collectively with everybody at the table that enables larger ambitions to be sustained. I'm making it sound easy. It's not, because in many ways, it's so different in each case, and we're often, having sort of discouraging moments and sort of stand back a bit and then figure out how to re-engage and re-enter the conversation with kind of refreshed energy with other voices at the table to keep the ambitions high.
Right, and always thinking that it's the long run. It's a marathon, not a sprint for projects like that. So I do want to turn the Q&A over to the audience. So I hope you can hear the questions. Please let us know. Thank you for bearing with us with the technology.
Hi, my name is Julia Gallagher. I'm with Ox Architecture. And I had the pleasure I was at Barnard College when you were doing the Nexus building, I think many years ago. And your work's been such an inspiration to a lot of what I've been able to be a part of. Right now I'm stepping into a campus project that will take endurance. But I'd like you to speak a little bit about, what's beautiful about your work is that it looks like strategies have built upon each other to create the body of what you've created. And like less than form, it's the strategies that you use to bring the circulation, to bring the light, to bring materials together. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, on how you've built that language, and how you've been able to apply it to the different types of projects that you worked on.
Well, thanks for your observation about Barnard. I'm glad the Diana Center actually hosted some big ambitions on your part to think strategically too, because that was we were so lucky with a visionary president and provost and team there that the whole idea of strategy was important to them. For us, I think it has been a privilege to be able to work with so many people who value landscape as much as architecture, because strategy involves things that are outside the footprint of a building at all times. And, for us, I think we like to delay the definition of architecture absolutely to the very last minute and focus first on constructing the site and its engagement with larger territories. And when that then has to multiply in height, then some of the real questions have to do with that journey of ascent, to keep collaboration and movement and dialogue in focus. That becomes sort of the triple challenge. But I think we really do like to delay architectural expression and materials in service of an ability to collaborate with a larger territory and delay that so that, in fact, strategy can guide first and be an enduring kind of conceptual armature.
I think we have another question for you.
Hi, my name is Shar Razi. I'm from Woods Bagot. Thank you so much for an amazing presentation. Seeing that a lot of the projects that you shared were urban improvements alongside architecture, I just wanted to ask about advocacy. We have a lot of problems with green spaces in Los Angeles. We're lacking open areas for people to breathe, especially in underserved communities, low-income communities. Just wanted to ask, because this is an area that I'm interested in, advocacy for green spaces. I was wondering if you had ever come across a project that needed your push or any advocacy that you've done to make a project better as a green space for the public. Yeah.
You're asking such an important question because, in fact, the terms and conditions of what we can do and where we can do our work is often shaped by the people who invite us to participate, whether it's a government or private entity who invite us to participate as designers in that conversation. And so that kind of companion question is, how do we advocate for green space, not only through our work, but maybe through other forms of advocacy? And I would say that any organization that is focused on that within your city is a great organization to join. Any place where that kind of advocacy can gather momentum is important for us. Both Michael Manfredi and I teach, and teaching becomes a place where we are able, among other things, to actually collectively as a research studio, collaborate with organizations and governments to say, let's ask some bigger questions that might not be on the table right now, but maybe we can change the stakes and expectations, conditions of how we think about infrastructure in particular as something that could simultaneously become a public realm. And so our interest is not only doing it through the work, but maybe through reframing the conversation and expectations where, in a sense, power resides.
Thank you.
All right, well, we are at time for our Q&A, so thank you so much to Marian and to our audience for the inspiring presentation.